Okay. I'm Helen Murphy, and I'm here talking with Stan Steindl, who I'll introduce shortly. But first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that I am on the unceded lands of the Nyangbil people of the Bundjalung Nation. I pay my respects to them, their custodianship of this wonderful place, and to the First Nations custodians, past, present, and future, of all the lands we are blessed to be on as we come together for this National Day of Compassion. So, Stan Steindl is a clinical psychologist, trainer, researcher, writer, podcaster, and creator of the YouTube channel Compassion in a T-shirt. And we'll learn more about you shortly, Stan. But let's kick off with a question that you posed for us at the opening event of the National Day of Compassion this morning. And that question is, if compassion could go viral, what would you want the world to catch first?
Yes, well, hello, Helen. And thank you very much for having me. I'd just like to acknowledge I'm on Gubbi Gubbi country, which is in and around the Sunshine Coast in Queensland. And so, yes, I echo your thoughts. Feel very privileged and grateful to live and work on these lands and acknowledge the traditional custodians here as well. But yes, I posed that question, and it's a big one. And I was trying to think, like, what do I even mean by that? Like, what if compassion was to go viral? I think what was coming to mind was just the way that so many other things that do go viral can be such sources of suffering for us. And many kind of ideas or that travel the world virally are really coming from often from our threat system, and they relate to fear or kind of even aspects of shame or but also on the flip side from our drive system, greed or competition and so on. And so what we end up having is these sort of viral moments that are for many just often very painful. And so I was kind of imagining, like what would it be like if compassion went viral? We are evolved to be compassionate. That's sort of at the heart of it in some ways. And so it's in there. It is just like threat system or drive system. Compassion or a compassionate motivation is in there. It's kind of core to our very being. And I was just imagining, like wisdom, strength, and courage, care and kindness, that ability to, well, not only think about how can I be helpful to others and to the world and so on, but also, how can I be helpful towards myself in this moment? People have so many sort of blocks to that sometimes, but yeah, I just think that if self-compassion and compassion could go viral, then it would just be a world with much less suffering.
Yes, all of those really sort of important things that we're capable of, and yet when threat system sort of hit clicks in, and particularly, some of those are sort of like, immediate with obvious threats, but then a sort of, a sense of, generally feeling a bit unsafe or uncertain about the world or its future or, what's happening overseas. And we get very, that threat activation system, leads us to, channel to narrow into, me, mine, those things. Yeah. So when I was thinking about that question, I was thinking about, um, our tendency to other a lot, when we're in that system, and that, if compassion could go viral, then one thing that might be happening is that more people would be recognizing the common humanity that we have with
Mm.
others and actually with other species as well, the things that we have in common with the other things that live on the planet. Yeah.
Yes, compassion, as you said before we started recording, like it really is the antidote to some of those sources of suffering and but the funny thing is that actually, compassion feels good too. It has its own self-reinforcing aspect to it. Yeah, as Matthew Ricard has said, compassion has a twofold benefit. It benefits those that we're being compassionate towards, but it also benefits ourselves, and that's okay. The compassionate person can feel uh, stronger and kind of happier and I think Thich Nhat Hanh once said more beautiful. And so yes, it really does create an antidote to much of what you were mentioning there.
Definitely. It's like everybody wins. So you can see
Everybody
why
wins.
some of us are really, playing around in this space. And so, on that note, as a sort of more formal introduction, Stan, you have over 30 years' experience as a therapist, a trainer, a researcher, presenter. You're compassionate about motivational interviewing and compassion focused therapy. You facilitate compassionate mind training, and you have authored The Gifts of Compassion and its accompanying personal practice workbook. And then there is your marvelous Compassion in a T-shirt YouTube channel with talks and podcasts, and you've published some of the scripts from those as well as I can see. So I'd love to talk to you about compassion in a T-shirt, but I wonder if we should perhaps explain a little bit to the people who are tuning in this afternoon about compassion focused therapy and what brought you to compassion focused therapy in your clinical work.
Yeah, well, you mentioned motivational interviewing, I suppose, and that's my really long-standing professional love since I think 2007. I first had training as a Mint member and an MI trainer. But what happened in about 2012 was that compassion was introduced into the MI spirit. It was sort of more formally written in there in the big book by Miller and Rolnick on motivational interviewing, and so that really piqued my curiosity. Like what is compassion really, and also how do we train or cultivate, compassion within the context of MI. I mean, compassion has sort of been at the heart of what we do always, hasn't it, really? Right from the beginning of working as a therapist and compassion is in there. But that opportunity to really more formally understand, kind of what it is. And so looking around and I suppose I stumbled across the work of Professor Paul Gilbert, who developed compassion focused therapy and compassionate mind training, really. Well, his definition, as many will know already, but just for completeness, I suppose, his definition of compassion is that it is a sensitivity to suffering in self and others with a commitment to try to alleviate and prevent it. So it's really about engaging with suffering, having that compassionate engagement, and taking some sort of helpful action to alleviate and prevent it. And so that was really helpful to sort of think, okay, well, we have a bit of a definition. And then we sort of understand what some of the attributes are there, or the skills maybe that we might bring to compassion: sensitivity, sympathy, distress tolerance, empathy, non-judgment, care for well-being. These are all sort of attributes or skills or competencies, I think, in some ways, Paul would say that we might bring to really sort of engaging with suffering in an effective and helpful manner. And all of those, really work together. We want to experience sort of sympathy for the sufferer. We want to feel sort of moved by that and moved by what they're going through. But distress tolerance is important there too, because we're working with suffering. And so to be able to manage our own personal experience of that or emotional response to that in a way that doesn't create distress, but instead, helps us to stay engaged and then kind of empathize, to really understand the other person's perspective, but maybe also resonate with their feelings and so on. So Paul Gilbert, as part of CFT, really helps to define it and to it sort of help us to understand where we can practice and develop our skills and so on towards com compassion. And then CFT, of course, really brings in lots of psychoeducational elements, not least the evolved tricky brains that we have, and then certain body-based practices or imagery-based practices that help us to develop that compassionate part of ourselves, and then perhaps putting the compassionate mind or the compassionate self into action, whether that be trying to find a way to be helpful towards others or those around us, trying to open ourselves up to receiving the compassion from others, or in fact, developing our own self-compassion and trying to manage things like self-criticism or some of those more difficult little ways that our tricky brains kind of work. And so I suppose, yeah, that's kind of CFT very much in a nutshell. I mean, the Compassionate Mind is an important book by Paul Gilbert, and it's a book rich with evolutionary psychology and clinical psychology, social psychologies, the various approaches to psychotherapy that he's drawn on. It's a very rich and detailed and wonderful book if anyone's wanting to really dive into this idea of CFT.
Yeah, thanks, Stan. I think one of the things that, I had found in my well, I was very, very lucky to have Professor Paul Gilbert come and visit my part of the world, and myself and colleagues and other people I know in this small region got the benefit of that. But yes, the psychoeducation component and the understanding about the biological sort of imperatives for some of the ways in which we suffer and how we might respond to that, and other ways that we can then deal with that. So how compassion can activate soothing and tend and befriend systems, and so with that, it feels like it was definitely a way that people could enter into this space in a sort of feeling safe sort of a way to kind of go, right, okay, now I get it. It's not all my fault. I can take responsibility for it, but it's actually, it's not my fault that I'm wired this way. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, that evolutionary piece of it is just kind of profound for me, that idea that, we've always cared for one another, actually. There's those archaeological discoveries of ancient primitive human remains where various disease, evidence of disease in the bones are there that really the person would never have lived as long as they did
Mm.
without having been looked after or brought food and water and carried around and protected and looked after. And so we have all those really tricky aspects, the threat system we were talking about, and threat and drive and all that sort of
Mm.
stuff. But yeah, it's really compassion is sort of an evolved part of our species as well. And I mean, that's why in some ways there are 8 billion people on the planet, because we can be very cruel, and there are really difficult aspects to our evolved brains as well. But overall, we tend to look after each other more so than anything else.
Yes, we need to connect. Um, so tell us then a little bit about compassion in a t-shirt. I'll ask you to introduce it, and for anybody interested, just go and look at it on YouTube, and Stan will pop up, and there are, an enormous number of episodes now. So, what is it? What sort of topics and guests, and what's your intended audience? Tell us about the show.
Yeah, right. Well, I really appreciate the chance to talk about it and to even to have reflected on it. I've sort of pondered and dived into the analytics and stuff to prepare for this. I don't know. I hope it will be of a bit of interest for people watching, just to sort of hear a bit behind the scenes. But yeah, compassion in a t-shirt. I think it was my attempt to maybe help compassion go viral. Although mainly what I was keen to do was to sort of just kind of disseminate, but kind of demystify a little bit. I think that's the idea of compassion in a t-shirt. It's sort of sometimes people can have various connotations about compassion and what it is or what it means, and sometimes can feel that it's a bit sort of difficult to comprehend or abstract an idea and that sort of thing. And so the basic motivation to begin with was to kind of disseminate it all in a kind of plain language sort of a way that people can think about compassion and make it a bit practical, and what is it that I can do, to help with all of that. I was looking back, and I wrote a few notes here. The first episode was in on the 17th of November 2019. And that one was actually fears, blocks, and resistances to compassion. So I guess we didn't mention this before, but that's a big part of Paul's theory too, is that we have certain fears, blocks, and resistances to compassion or receiving compassion or self-compassion. And so I sort of thought about that, and it was just curious to think that that's where I started with compassion in a t-shirt, was to sort of start to talk about how, perhaps you've heard about this thing about compassion and noticed certain blocks arise, and so starting there, I guess, to really help people to think about, what might it be like to work through those kind of blocks and to be more compassionate towards ourselves and others and that sort of thing. But yeah, no, there's I think there's over 300 videos on there, 118 guest interviews, with sort of a bunch more saved and ready to go up. It's had 325,000 views and nearly 5,000 subscribers. So it's all of that. There's a few interesting little tidbits there. 53% of the viewers are female. So it's actually pretty even on that front. There's 20% are from America, 18 from the UK, and 10% from Australia. And pretty evenly spread from 25 to 64-year-olds as well. So the age, it's interesting that it's sort of across the ages a little bit. The most viral I've gotten was a conversation with Dr. James Doty. Actually, he's the most watched video with 25,000 views or something like that. And as you know, and many will know, Jim passed away recently, which was really a very just sort of really very very sad, and kind of is still kind of the ripples is still there for me, really, even well, I guess it's only a few weeks later, but he has he has probably gone a bit viral, really, to be honest, out of all of us. And certainly my interview with him, he was able to describe quite beautifully his journey into compassion. Chris Germer is another one. He's been viewed 22,000 times or something like that. He along with Kristen Neff developed mindful self-compassion. So, and the other ones too are the video explainers, I guess. Like I have a bunch of what is CFT type videos where I'm just kind of talking to camera and being watched tens of thousands of times as well. So, I mean, those are just some of the little stats, I guess, but behind it all. There is also there's the YouTube channel and the podcast, and I have noticed that the I haven't looked at the stats on this, but the podcast listens are often um, people tend to listen to the guest interviews more so than watching it on YouTube, which makes sense because they're kind of like a longer format. So people can check it out on YouTube or even listen to it through YouTube Music, but also yes, listening to it through Apple Podcasts and things like that is also available. So there's a little
Mm.
snapshot for you.
Just incredible the amount of I mean, certainly the hours um, of material, but and what
Yeah.
you've put in to it as well. And really, we're coming up for 6 years then, Stan. Um, what what
Yeah.
what keeps you going?
Well, there's multiple things. I mean, I feel very curious and interested and passionate about this topic of compassion and through the channel I've just had so many wonderful conversations with different people and all over the world and hearing their perspectives. I'm a kind of a compassion focused therapy person in my therapy practice and so on, but it's been wonderful to talk to people who are acceptance and commitment therapists or mindfulness-based practitioners or the mindful self-compassion and getting to talk to Kristen Neff and even just sort of schema therapists or IFS therapists. That compassion is in there, I guess, and so getting the chance to talk to all of those people has just been a real privilege. I really enjoy speaking with early career people as well. We've had a number of people come on and talk about their PhD findings or recent publications, and I really try to make it a bit of a soft landing for early career people, like who haven't maybe been on a podcast yet, but, try to have a really comfortable, safe experience, doing their first podcast and that sort of thing. In fact, if anyone's listening and you're excited about a recent publication that you've had or some work that you're doing or whatever, please get in touch and really keen to support that and to help disseminate your work as well. So that's really been a very kind of motivating part of the whole thing. And I enjoy the technical sides as well, to be honest. Like I get to have a cool microphone and a couple of lights and fancy camera maybe and work all that out. I got someone to teach me how to use Final Cut Pro so I could edit the videos. And, it's just a hobby, I think, as much as anything. Because, as you say, every interview is about an hour long, and then the
Mm,
editing is often an hour or two. And,
mm.
kind of then the writing of the description and the various, other bits and pieces, and then finally uploading it. So it's a labor of love, really, in that sense.
Well, I think there's the prep too. You'd need to, know something of the work of the, people that you're, interviewing.
That's one of the
Um,
fun things, though, too, actually. Like
mm,
I recently interviewed um, Warren Ward and Lexi Crouch for their new
mhm.
book, Renourish, which meant that I got sent a new book. So that was sort of fun as well. And I got to read that in preparation and get to read people's research papers and systematic reviews and so on. Nikki Petrocchi has published along with colleagues a really very, very detailed and interesting meta-analyses about CFT and its effectiveness. And so, getting to read that and then hear Nikki explain it all and how it all worked, those sort of things are just really great and informative and keep me going.
So you're really sort of, keeping at the forefront, at the edge of, what's happening in the compassion space, I guess, and related areas.
Hoping to, yeah. There's so much happening, which is
Mm,
exciting. That there's so much. It's on that sort of exponential curve thing that happens in science sometimes when
mm,
a topic sort of, kind of begins and bubbles along a bit and then gradually picks up speed. And I think the area of compassion science is really like that. And so there's more and more coming out all the time.
Mm. So, apart from being sort of like fairly spread in terms of gender and age and that sort of thing, do you have a sense of, who the audience is? Is it mainly uh, people in clinical roles, or is it broader than that? What's your sense of that?
My sense is that a lot of more regular viewers are possibly in the clinical or therapist kind of world. And sometimes I get comments on the videos and that sort of thing, and I always really love receiving those. It sort of sometimes you put a video out and it's like, is anybody out there? But sometimes I'll get these little comments from, and it might be from someone who's getting into CFT and has really says they appreciate, the various videos and so on, or it might be other clinicians and that sort of thing. But I really kind of, get excited too. People who are struggling with certain aspects of what it is to be a human being. There's little
Mm.
videos in there about, shame and guilt and the difference maybe between shame and guilt and how we might conceptualize that, or how to sort of manage resentment, feelings and taking a compassionate approach to that. And often people will uh, sort of comment and talk about their own life experiences and what they've been through and how this video's made a bit of sense for them about something. And so that's been really interesting. Although I noticed recently, uh, where was it? Oh, yes. I did a how to let go of resentment in 8 compassion focused ways. I mean, this is the other thing is you've got to work out the click-worthy titles, like
Yeah.
so the how-to titles are often quite good. How to let go of resentment in 8 compassion focused ways. And just about a week ago, someone commented, just cliches, useless. So you get, you get those sort of comments sometimes as well. And I, sort of feel that it is a hard one to deal with, isn't it? Those feelings of resentment. And, a 10 or 20-minute video is not necessarily going to solve all of that for someone. And perhaps they go to it hoping for more and yet feel disappointed too. I responded, "Oh, well, thanks for watching anyway and taking the time to comment." Prayer hands.
Mm.
So, just sort of trying to engage with people and be have that sort of understanding. But again, it's tricky. A lot of this stuff is really tricky.
Yes, so I guess, just in terms of the sort of, the way that we understand that, uh, well, social media and that sort of thing, works these days, do you feel like people are more likely to make a comment if it's, a question or a query or a concern or an objection than something positive or no?
No, I think overwhelmingly I get kind of positive comments. That's very interesting. I'm going to try that. Those
Mm.
various pretty positive kind of comments. But there's definitely a percentage there of people who feel um, frustrated or respond in more, I guess, kind of frustrated or angry tones, and I don't begrudge that at all. I think that I'm putting the stuff out there in good faith, sort of thing, to see what people think, and negative comments are just as valid. I think often it represents some of those fears, blocks, and resistances, really, that
Yeah.
people some a person some time ago said CFT is a pseudoscience and dangerous or something like that. So it's sort of you can sense there that there's suffering possibly at play and a kind of a concern or reservations or even fears around, like what this compassion thing is all about will it make me more vulnerable or will people take advantage of me or compassion is a weakness or those sorts of things. So it's sort of, I think, quite helpful really to sometimes engage in not for too long, but I usually try to still respond and sort of engage in some of the conversation. Of course, any engagement is good for the YouTube analytics, or the algorithm. So either way, it's great to get comments back.
Yeah. So I believe I just attended it was actually a New South Wales government ran a webinar for using social media for creatives, which I attended the other night. So yeah,
Yeah,
um, we shall see where that goes for me. But
yeah, interesting, interesting.
so, so what makes an episode popular, do you think? What is it that brings people, to kind of the things that actually get the big numbers of
Yeah,
people?
it's like it's something of a mystery to be honest. Um, I have noticed that more well-known guests will get more views. So Jim Doty, Paul Gilbert, Kristen Neff, Chris Germer, Stephen Hayes, those sorts of names tend to get more views. Although there are some really great CFT researchers and practitioners, Tobin Bell, Kate Lucra, Clodagh Dowling, they have had. So I think there's something in that. There's a familiarity of certain names and so on. But also, on the other hand, it can depend a little bit on the person's kind of sharing and kind of promoting of the video too, and if people put it out there on their social media kind of stuff, then sometimes it can be an early career person, but it can be widely viewed because of sometimes their sort of enthusiasm to kind of promote it and so on. The things around titles and thumbnails. I mean, when you get into the YouTube world, they talk all about that sort of stuff, and I find that hard to know, what really works. But in terms of some of um, the I call them video essays. There's the guest interviews, and then there's the video essays, which are more just me speaking to camera, and a lot of the explainer type videos are quite popular there. The what is CFT type videos seem to work very well as well.
Mm.
But it is a real mystery. If anyone out there can give me some sort of answer to this question, it'd be good. And it's often surprising. Sometimes I feel like a video that I really love, and like I jumped on the bandwagon of Taylor Swift one time when she put out a new album, not the coming album, which or the current engagement of Taylor Swift. I mean, those are all very important things happening at the moment. But this was her previous album, and I wondered whether I could get on the bandwagon of that, and but it didn't really go viral in any way. So it's
Well, of course, Stan, you could always ask AI, and so here's the segue. You
okay.
have a couple of you've had a couple of conversations with AI on the channel, and of course this is a topic of considerable interest or concern for many people at the moment. So I found that particularly interesting,
Mm.
and I'd be curious as to whether other people did too.
Yeah, no, that did garner some interest, and I tried it in a couple of ways. One was asking ChatGPT to be like a client, and I gave it a bit. I gave them. Oh, do I use what is it? It or is it he or she? Or it's hard with ChatGPT to know what we're meant to say. But I gave it some instructions about the kind of client that I was hoping it would be, and that was someone who was quite reluctant around self-compassion. And then I used motivational interviewing to explore, the kind of pros and cons of self-compassion with ChatGPT, and it was interesting. It performed the role quite well, and gave a chance to for me as the interviewer to practice those skills. I
Mm,
also did another funny one where I interviewed ChatGPT about CFT and what is
yeah.
CFT, and it I thought it did a remarkable and slightly frightening job of explaining what CFT was. It didn't make errors around confusing CFT with MSC or something like that. It stuck to the CFT thing. But I've also interviewed someone about AI and compassion, and it's interesting because there's been research on this whereby they compared compassionate responses from AI versus real and skilled human responders. And participants rated AI as more compassionate
Mm,
than the real human responders. Now, this was in written form, and and it wasn't a full conversation. It was more just sort of snippets of responses and so on. Um, but it's an interesting sort of future and not too far away where I can only imagine that AI will become more and more effective at this sort of thing. Even when participants knew that it was AI that was responding, that their
mm,
ratings of the compassion took a bit of a hit, but they still saw the AI as more compassionate than the human responders. So I sort of wonder about a future where the AI can hook into our biometrics and can sort of, measure heart rate variability and pupil dilation and the little tiny nuances of facial expression or voice tone, and it's gathering all of this data. Perhaps it will be able to effectively empathize and or at least sort of a version a version of that. It's
yeah.
interesting.
It's just such a yeah interesting future I think that we face. Um, I'd like to sort of delve in a little bit, if we may, in the last few minutes about the actual experience of interviewing, that the process of the interview that you conduct. Your questions are by nature reflective, the questions that you ask your guests, and perhaps encourage opportunities for insight. And I'm wondering whether or not that's it's you've had feedback from your guests that was useful for them, or even for yourself, um,
Mm.
that there is a reflective process going on.
Yeah. Yes, it's that's an interesting sort of a thought. I take a very open question followed by reflective listening kind of approach, which
Mm,
I'm sure is, my motivational interviewing and kind of Carl Rogers sort of, he's my certainly one of my big heroes, just that person-centered reflective listening approach. And I feel like I have, yeah, had feedback from guests that they found the interviewing style, well, firstly, both safe and comfortable, but also little insights arose, or little reflections gave them certain ways to think about what they're saying, and um, kind of may help make a bit of sense out of it. It definitely is helpful for me to really kind of understand where they're coming from about it. I have had feedback from colleagues, actually, especially in the CFT world, that I could be more challenging of some people's responses. So if I'm working with someone, especially maybe from who's taking a different therapeutic perspective, there might be some opportunities there to push back or to have a different view and that sort of thing. And firstly, I don't think it's really in my nature to do that. I'm not really big at challenging or sort of arguing. I think I really approach it in the way of just trying to see if I can get the best out of the person that I'm interviewing and help them to really, kind of explain and elaborate on their point of view and perspective, and then the viewer or the listener can sort of make sense of that, really.
Yes, I think it's, and um, my opinion in terms of watching um, some of these, certainly not all, but is that it's there is a lovely sort of like flow of conversation. It's not just you're there providing the opportunity for them to give you information. um,
Mm,
it's
yeah.
a dynamic, and that to me makes it really interesting to watch. um,
I think there's definitely
yeah.
a back and forth that gets to hopefully sort of somewhat deeper places about, the different perspectives and so on. Yeah.
And so, what do you think if you were to sort of, step back and think about what you've gained from this project? This,
Mm,
coming up for 6 years, the 300 plus, you know, um, episodes. Um,
yeah.
what, what is it that you've gained, do you think, or learned or gotten from this project
Mm,
slash hobby slash professional development opportunity?
yes. Um, Oh, I just think that there's this. Maybe this swings back to the beginning of our conversation in a way, and in that it is this really very moving and encouraging sense that compassion is everywhere already,
Mm,
sort of a thing. And compassion focused therapy, kind of really makes compassion explicit, I guess, as a therapeutic approach. But I've been able to interview people from lots of different approaches, and the compassion sort of is everywhere, explicitly or implicitly, and it really is this sense that there are many people who want to be helpful and certainly not harmful
mm,
to themselves and others, really is the idea. And so I think that's the compassion really is at the heart of it. But also too, like compassion is in the music of Brian Wilson or Taylor Swift, and compassion is in books and novels, and it's in kind of historical events, all the way back, and it's in the ancient philosophy of kind of the philosophies of life and so on and so forth, and just when you probably the thing that I really have loved and appreciated is just when you turn your attention to compassion, you start to find it everywhere, and even in some of the really terrible times, I suppose, that are happening around the world and that we're facing at the moment, and some of the tribalism, the othering that you were referring to, and so on. And yet, in amongst it all, there's compassion. I mean, we have tricky brains, and that's been probably very clear to me and a lot of people as well. And we have these fears, blocks, and resistances to it. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a little bit of a kind of a theme of, you know, empathy is a weakness, or compassion is a weakness, and political movements where, that there's sort of this real denigrating of compassion. I interviewed someone recently, Didi Stout, about harm reduction as a really a compassionate motivation. That idea of alcohol and drugs and harm reduction approaches and so on. But of course, there's a lot of cuts and blocks to funding in America, for example, at the moment for something like harm reduction, where you're not allowed to have those words in research proposals or and yet it is such a very effective way to reduce suffering, really. And so, there is this bit of a push against it and but I suspect that's the fears, blocks, and resistances that are, the balance can sometimes tip one way or another. But yes, the real lesson for me in all of this is that compassion is everywhere, and when you really turn your attention to it, it comes alive in all sorts of sometimes unexpected places, actually.
Mm, yes, indeed. And um, yeah, I wonder if I'm just mindful of the time now, but I'm wondering if you can think of any particular surprises.
That's an interesting one. Let me pause and I'll give you a funny one. How about that as a sort of an ending? You can't see, but my big um, kind of other hobby is Batman comics, and so I have a bookshelf full of them over there, and you know Batman was once told, that compassion is his weakness, and he said, compassion is a strength, and it's what separates us from the evildoers or something. Damn, I can't quite remember the quote, um, but yeah, that's a surprising one. Compassion is even found in the pages of Batman.
Batman, there you go. All right, so where to from here? Stan Steindl with compassion in a t-shirt. With you, what's lying ahead? What's coming up for you?
Hmm. Well, compassion in a t-shirt rolls along. Again, if anyone would like to come and talk about their work, I'd be very delighted to hear from you. I do weekly interviews and put up weekly episodes, so that's certainly to continue. The Compassionate Mind Foundation has a conference coming up in early October, and so I'm excited to be presenting a workshop there, which is all about using motivational interviewing to work through fears, blocks, and resistances to compassion as part of CFT. So if anyone wants to come to the conference itself, which has got a really great list of other workshops, but also presentations in the conference itself, um, check it out. We might even include some links to these things, perhaps, Helen, I guess.
Yes.
And we also have the UQ Compassion Symposium conference coming up later in November. And at the moment, we have a call for presenters out there too. So if you would like to present at our little annual Compassion Symposium, we can be in touch there as well. And actually, we'll include maybe something about that too, because we're just in the presenter sort of recruitment phase at the moment. So yes, and then on we go to 2026. Actually, just on that, now that I think about it, Dr. James Kirby and I are presenting an introduction to compassion focused therapy in March next year too. So there's a few
And
things there that are coming up in the not so distant future.
and that will be in Brisbane or
That'll be in Brisbane and
yeah.
held at the Victoria Park
Yeah.
Conference Centre.
Mhm.
And yeah, so that's always a lot of fun. I really enjoy presenting with my old mate James. But also, yeah, like a really 3 days of hopefully some really great learning too around CFT.
Mm, definitely. Okay, so we'll make sure that we've got links to those things in the uh, when this goes up on the Charter for Compassion webinar. And it's been delightful, Stan. It's been great to sort of drill down a little bit and to hear a bit more about what compassion in a t-shirt is like for you, um,
Yes.
as well as the broad range, the wonderful resource that it is. If people are interested in dipping into that.
Mm.
So thank you and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you very much for having me. And it was very fun to reflect on all of that. And yes, good luck with Compassion in Action 2025.
Yes, yes. Good. Got to get the message out. Okay.